You can feel it tonight. That quiet ache beneath the noise. It is not pain exactly, more like a soft pulse reminding you that something inside still breathes, still waits. The world outside has gone dim. Even the city seems to hold its breath. Somewhere between the hum of the streetlights and the ticking of the clock, you realize how long it has been since you last listened to yourself. The silence feels heavier than usual, but not unkind. It does not want to hurt you. It wants to speak. Beyond the window, the night drifts like a dark sea. And in that sea, countless souls wander, each one searching for the sound of its own name. Loneliness, Jung once said, is not a punishment, but the beginning of transformation. It is the moment when the soul, tired of distractions, finally returns to its depth. He thought of solitude as a vast ocean. You enter it trembling, afraid of drowning. But the longer you float, the more you realize the water was never meant to take you, only to hold you. So let the night be quiet. Let the distance between you and the world widen gently. Because somewhere within that distance, a door is opening, not outward, but inward. And through it, you will find not emptiness, but the shape of who you have always been. The room is still, a small island of quiet where the only motion is the slow sweep of the clock hand. Lamplight rests on the table and softens the corners, turning every edge into something kinder. He sits without purpose, as if the chair has been waiting for him all along, and the air seems to listen more than it speaks. In this hush, even the dust moves like thought, unhurried, unafraid, almost tender. At first, the silence feels like a closed door. Then it becomes a corridor. The mind sends out a word and hears it return. Changed. As if the walls themselves are thoughtful. The room is a sounding board, and every quiet idea comes back as a question that asks to be held a little longer. He notices how often life has been arranged to avoid this moment. There have been screens, conversations, tasks that filled the hours with small brightness. None of them were wrong, but all of them were loud. Now the volume falls, and what remains is the simple pulse of being here. A rhythm as steady as the clock. Loneliness enters like a careful guest, not to accuse, but to reveal. It is the first mirror a person ever meets when the crowd has gone home. In that mirror, he sees not failure, not lack, but an outline that invites color, a shape that asks to be filled from within. The question is gentle and exact. What has been abandoned in order to belong? He sees how thoughts bounce and return, how a doubt sent forward circles back as curiosity. The room makes echoes of feeling, not to haunt him, but to help him measure their weight. A memory rises, almost harmless now, and he recognizes that it has only wanted attention, the kind given to a plant moved closer to the window. The night answers by staying quiet, which is its way of saying continue. He lets the shoulders lower and the breath deepen. For 5 minutes, he does nothing but sit and listen to the body that has carried him through every hour without applause. In, a soft gathering. Out, a longer release. The mind tries to narrate, then remembers the task and simply keeps time with the lungs. In this small practice, the mirror clears. A fear that once demanded explanation becomes a feeling that can be held. A wish that was delayed takes a single step toward language. He understands, without needing to prove it, that not every ache is a problem and not every silence is empty. The room remains a patient instrument When a thought arrives sharp, it returns rounded. When a worry goes out heavy, it comes back lighter, as if sanded by wind. The echo is not punishment. It is a teacher that uses his own voice to show him where the truth begins. He realizes there is no need to force meaning. Meaning grows when it is given the light of attention and the shade of rest. This is why the quiet feels honest. It takes nothing away except the noise that hides what matters. The clock moves again and the minute belongs to him. He has done nothing extraordinary, and yet something has shifted, like a door that did not open with a click, but with a widening of dark into gentle space. The mantra arrives as a thought that feels older than language, and it fits in the room as if it were built into the walls. Silence doesn't take from you. It returns you to yourself. When he finally looks up, the air seems clearer. The night holds him without demand. The mirror stands where it stood before, but now it reflects a person who has stopped performing for a crowd that is not here. The story does not rush. It unfolds like breath, and the next step waits inside the next quiet minute, ready to be heard. Beyond the quiet room, the world continues its familiar performance. Laughter drifts from the hallway, bright and effortless, carrying the rhythm of belonging. For a moment, it sounds like warmth, but as it fades through the walls, what remains is an echo that does not reach the heart. The sound fills space, yet it leaves the air untouched, like wind moving through an empty shell. There is a strange comfort in proximity, in being surrounded by movement, noise, and light. It convinces the mind that loneliness has left, that silence has been defeated. He once believed it too, that closeness meant connection, that presence meant understanding. But the longer he listened, the more he noticed a different kind of emptiness, one that hums beneath conversation and applause. It is the hollow pause after laughter, the quiet under every crowded room. He sees now that people often seek others not to share themselves, but to forget themselves. Noise becomes a disguise, a wall built out of words. The louder the world grows, the easier it becomes to disappear inside it. And yet, when the laughter ends and the door closes, what returns is not peace, but the same question the silence once asked. Who are you when no one is looking? The mind is clever at building company from fragments. A screen glowing in the dark, a notification blinking like a heartbeat, a calendar full of gatherings, all of it pretending to be proof of life. But connection cannot live in constant movement. It needs stillness to root, honesty to breathe. What we call companionship often hides a quiet bargain. I will distract you from yourself if you will distract me from mine. He remembers the nights when he stayed too long in conversations that meant nothing, laughed at jokes that dulled his own truth, and called it friendship. Each time he returned home heavier, as though every word borrowed from others had cost him a piece of his own voice. The next morning, the silence felt sharper, like a mirror reflecting how much he had traded just to avoid looking at it. There is a tenderness in realizing this without anger. People are not deceitful by design. They are afraid of hearing the depth of their own thoughts, afraid of meeting the quiet that lives beneath their noise. Society teaches that silence is failure, that solitude is suspicion, and so the crowd becomes a refuge. But a refuge built from fear is not a home. It is a maze that loops back to itself. He begins to wonder what would happen if, just once, he stopped chasing sound. if he could let the laughter move past without needing to join it. Perhaps there is more truth in the quiet corners, in the slow rhythm of his own breathing, than in the constant proof of being surrounded. To find company in himself is not withdrawal, but return. For tonight, he tries something simple. He writes down 3 things he does only to feel the emptiness. Small rituals of avoidance that once felt harmless. The list is brief, but each line carries a mirror. The scroll through endless screens, the conversation without meaning, the constant need to be seen. As he finishes, the noise inside grows softer, as if the world finally understands it no longer needs to perform. Outside, the laughter fades completely. Inside, the quiet expands, but it does not ache. It feels like breathing room, like honesty slowly unfolding. He realizes that connection was never meant to be found in volume, but in presence. Noise is not connection. It is only distance dressed as comfort. And the one who dares to turn it off discovers something far greater. The gentle sound of his own being, steady and real beneath the quiet. Morning arrives quietly, not with noise, but with light. It slips through the thin fabric of the curtains, painting soft lines across the room. Dust moves slowly in the air, each grain catching a fragment of sun before falling back into stillness. It is in moments like this that the world seems to breathe again, calm, unhurried, alive in silence. He wakes, though he is not sure when waking truly began. Perhaps it started not with sleep's end, but with resistance's surrender. The loneliness that once felt like a storm now feels like a tide receding, leaving behind smooth sand and scattered shells. Nothing has been added, nothing has been taken away. Only the noise has settled, revealing the texture of quiet beneath. For so long, he fought against solitude, treating it as an intruder to be kept out. He filled his days with movement, his nights with distraction, afraid that stillness might expose him. Yet, in the end, exhaustion did what effort could not. It emptied him of struggle until there was nothing left to fight. And in that quiet collapse, something tender began. Not defeat, but release. He realizes now that peace was never hiding from loneliness. It was hiding beneath his refusal to feel it. The mind, like a shaken glass of water, cannot clear until it is left alone. The longer he sits, the more the surface steadies. Thoughts drift in, then dissolve. Worries knock, then fade. In their absence, he begins to hear the smallest sounds, his breath, the creak of the chair, the faint hum of life continuing outside. The air itself feels lighter, as if relieved to no longer carry the weight of his resistance. He remembers how solitude once pressed against his chest, how it tightened with the thought of being unseen. Now it sits beside him like an old friend who no longer needs to speak. The quiet no longer accuses. It simply exists, waiting to be met without fear. He understands that loneliness was never asking to be solved. It was asking to be witnessed, like a child left in the corner. It only wanted to be noticed, to be held in the gaze of understanding rather than avoidance. When he stops pushing it away, it softens. It becomes space, wide, forgiving, patient. There is a kind of wisdom that only appears when the noise disappears. It does not arrive as revelation, but as recognition. He begins to see that the peace he sought in others has always lived quietly in his own pulse. Every breath becomes a bridge, connecting what hurts with what heals, what trembles with what endures. He takes a pen and writes a single line. Loneliness taught me how to listen. The ink dries slowly, each word sinking into paper as if into earth. The sentence feels simple, yet it carries weight, the kind that does not burden but grounds. It is a truth too soft to shout, yet too real to forget. Outside, the world continues its morning rituals, footsteps, distant voices, the faint rhythm of life beginning again. Inside, he stays still, watching light and dust play across the air. The moment feels endless, not because time has stopped, but because he no longer wishes to chase it. He has met his own company and found it bearable, even beautiful. The peace that fills the room is not dramatic. It hums quietly, like breath returning to the body after a long pause. It asks for nothing and promises nothing except a presence. He understands now that every struggle was only a misunderstanding, a refusal to trust what silence could give. The light moves slowly across the wall, and he lets it. Somewhere in the gentle rhythm of this morning, the truth settles fully within him. Peace begins where resistance ends. There are smiles that feel heavy, not the ones born from joy, but the practiced ones, carefully placed, perfectly measured, polished by habit. They live on faces like porcelain, smooth and unbroken, hiding everything that trembles underneath in the reflection of a mirror. Such a smile looks convincing enough. Yet behind the curve of the lips, the body remembers its cost. He used to believe that smiling meant safety, that if his face was bright enough, the world would soften in return. Approval came easily that way, like warmth borrowed from a stranger's fire. People praised his calm, his kindness, his patience, not realizing that beneath each word, another truth waited in silence. He smiled to be accepted, and little by little, that smile began to speak louder than his real voice. The face became a kind of armor, smooth, shining, and always agreeable. A mask made not of clay or paint, but of glass, reflective, not transparent. It showed others what they needed to see, reflecting their comfort back to them, never his own. It mirrored the world so well that after a while, he could no longer remember what his own expression felt like when it wasn't rehearsed. There is a strange exhaustion that follows the performance of politeness, the kind that sleep cannot fix. It is not physical. It is the fatigue of shrinking oneself to fit a room. He began to notice how laughter sometimes echoed without him, how his own voice began to sound like someone else's script. The smile stayed, but something behind it grew quieter, more distant, waiting for permission to rest. One evening, standing before the mirror, he looked long enough to see the truth flicker through the reflection. The smile held, but the eyes looked like they were carrying too much light that did not belong to him. The glass seemed to ask a question. When did pretending become easier than honesty? He had no answer, only a feeling that the mask had protected him once, but now it was beginning to suffocate. He realized that every mask begins with good reason. It is never built out of deceit, but out of survival. A child learns early that peace is easier to maintain when the truth is softened. A worker learns that composure earns approval. A lover learns that silence avoids storms. Each lesson leaves a layer of glass until the reflection becomes the only thing left to show. But protection turns into prison when we forget who it was built for. The smile meant to comfort becomes a boundary between the world and the heart. It stops emotion from flowing both ways. Nothing painful gets in, but nothing real gets out. In its quiet way, the mask teaches invisibility. He takes a moment to write one sentence on a blank page. I pretend to agree so I will not be disliked. The words are small, but they echo. They do not accuse. They simply reveal. And in that admission, a thin crack appears in the mirror. Light seeps through, soft and honest. He does not tear the mask away. He simply learns to loosen it. There are moments in every day when he lets the face rest. No smile, no performance, just breath. In those pauses, he feels the weight of being human, and it is not unbearable. It is, in fact, a relief. He looks again at his reflection, and this time it looks back, not with perfection, but with presence. He realizes that even this version, tired and unguarded, is worthy of being seen. The smile that remains is smaller, quieter, but real. It does not seek to please. It seeks to tell the truth. Every mask was once protection. But when the danger fades, the courage lies not in keeping it intact, but in learning to take it off gently, without fear, until the glass becomes a window once more. Applause is a strange sound. It fills a room quickly, flooding every corner with warmth. Yet the moment it fades, a heavier silence follows. In that silence, he stands among the crowd. Lights shining, faces turned toward him, every eye expectant, admiring. To anyone watching, this looks like triumph. But beneath the weight of so many gazes, something inside begins to feel small, almost hollow. Approval, he once thought, was proof of worth. Every nod, every compliment, every hand reaching out felt like sunlight after a long winter. He learned early how to please, how to arrange his words, soften his tone, and give people what they wanted to hear. Each gesture of acceptance became a small victory, a sign that he belonged. But over time, the victories multiplied into chains. The need to be liked began to shape everything: how he spoke, how he dressed, how he existed. The more he was seen, the less he could see himself. It is a subtle kind of captivity, one that wears the disguise of affection. People say they admire you, but what they admire is a version carefully edited for their comfort. The self becomes a reflection built out of others' expectations, and the mirror grows heavier each time it is lifted. What once felt like belonging starts to feel like performance. What once sounded like love becomes noise. He begins to realize that approval is a fragile currency. It buys moments of validation, but costs fragments of freedom. Each time he bends to be accepted, a small part of his authenticity is spent. And when the applause stops, he finds himself counting what remains, wondering when he started mistaking recognition for connection. In a world that measures worth by visibility, it is easy to forget that being seen is not the same as being understood. Tonight, the air feels thick with echoes of praise that no longer touch him. He imagines how different it would feel to be unseen for a while, not ignored, but released. No spotlight, no performance, no proof to offer, just presence. The idea feels both terrifying and tender, like standing at the edge of a deep lake, unsure whether to step in. He decides to try something simple. For one day, he will not boast, not explain, not share. No photos to prove joy, no words to justify silence. Instead, he will listen, not to the noise of approval, but to the quiet beneath it. The mind resists at first, reaching for the familiar pulse of feedback, the small rush of being noticed. But as hours pass, something begins to loosen. Without the audience, his thoughts grow slower, his breath deeper, his own company less foreign. In that private stillness, he feels both lighter and truer. It is strange how freedom can feel so close to invisibility, and yet so full of life. He begins to see that what people praise is often only what they recognize in themselves, not what truly belongs to him. Their admiration was never a mirror, it was a projection. And the moment he stops depending on it, he stops being defined by it. The lights of the crowd dim. The applause fades into memory. Alone, he stands again in the same quiet that once frightened him. But this time, it feels like ground, not emptiness. What they praise is not always what you are. The words drift through his thoughts like a tide pulling back to sea. He understands now that worth does not need witnesses, and that sometimes the purest form of validation is the silence that follows when you finally stop asking for it. Rain begins without warning. Not a storm, but a slow, patient fall, the kind that softens everything it touches. The air smells of earth and metal, the sky washed pale. He stands by the window, watching droplets trace uneven paths down the glass, each one catching the faint reflection of his face before slipping away. The sound is steady, almost kind. It feels like the world reminding him how to let go. For years, he has worn the same expression, calm, composed, endlessly agreeable. It is the face that survives meetings, conversations, expectations. It has learned how to respond at the right moment, how to hide the small tremors of truth. Every day, it performs without question, and in return, the world offers peace in the form of predictability. But beneath that performance, there has always been a quiet ache, the kind that asks, who would I be if I stopped pretending? The rain continues, and he imagines it as something more than weather. Each drop is a small act of honesty, washing away the layers that time and approval have left behind. The foundation of the mask begins to thin. Powdered smiles, painted confidence, polite restraint, all dissolve under the weight of water. What remains is not beautiful in any familiar way, but it is real. The raw skin beneath breathes again. He realizes that authenticity is not the bright cinematic truth people talk about. It is quieter, slower, almost imperceptible. It lives in small gestures, the unfiltered laugh, the pause before speaking, the moment of stillness before answering yes when the heart means no. These moments are fragile, but they are the pulse of something alive. They are what remain when everything unnecessary has been rinsed away. To be authentic is to risk being misunderstood. The world prefers consistency over honesty, and the self that changes makes others uneasy. Yet there is a strength in imperfection, a steadiness born not from performance, but from presence. When he stops trying to maintain an image, he begins to inhabit his own body again, to hear his thoughts without translating them for someone else's comfort. He takes a notebook from the table, opens to a clean page, and writes one simple line. I feel most like myself when I am not being watched. The sentence surprises him with its clarity. It is neither confession nor rebellion, only recognition. It tells him that freedom does not require isolation. It requires permission. Permission to exist without editing. Outside, the rain begins to ease. Puddles form on the street, mirrors of soft light and movement. In them, his reflection shimmers, imperfect and alive, no longer fixed. He sees a face that belongs not to the world, but to him. One that smiles when it wishes, frowns without apology, breathes without performing. For the first time, he does not rush to fix it. The quiet after the rain feels different from silence. It hums low and steady, like the sound of something truthful finding its rhythm. He stands still and lets it fill him. The world does not end when the mask falls. It simply becomes honest. He turns from the window and lets the damp air touch his skin. There's no grand revelation, only ease. A calm born from finally returning to the beginning. The rain outside slows to a whisper, and the reflection in the glass no longer hides behind light. It just looks back, patient, real, unafraid. Authenticity is the quietest form of courage. There is a room in every mind that no one visits often. It sits above the daily noise, tucked away like an attic whose door is easy to ignore. The air there is heavy with dust, the kind that gathers only where time has stopped. Boxes rest against the walls, unlabeled, sealed long ago. Inside them lie moments too sharp to touch. The forgotten arguments, the words that went unheard, the small heartbreaks that never found a voice. This is the quiet home of everything a person has tried not to feel. He stands at the edge of that room, hesitant. The steps creak as if remembering each time he turned away. For years, he has kept this door closed, believing that whatever waited behind it was better left alone. Life below the attic is organized, polite, well lit. Up here, it smells like memory, a scent both familiar and haunting. Yet something in the silence calls him back. Perhaps he knows that healing does not come from escape, but from recognition. Every person carries such a companion, unseen, unspoken, but always near. It follows in the shadow of laughter, hides in the pauses between words, and sighs when the room falls quiet. Sometimes it shows its shape in dreams, sometimes in sudden irritations or fears that seem to have no reason. It is the part of the self that waited patiently while the rest of life moved on. It does not wish for punishment or pity. It only wants to be noticed. He kneels beside one of the boxes and opens it. Inside are fragments of feeling he once considered weakness, sadness that lingered too long, anger that frightened him, longing that felt too vulnerable to admit. Each emotion still carries the texture of its time, like fabric folded away before it was worn through. He touches them gently, surprised at how ordinary they seem now, how quiet compared to the noise he imagined. The mind protects by forgetting, but forgetting is not the same as release. Buried emotions do not disappear. They change shape. Unseen, they whisper through actions and choices, guiding the hand that avoids closeness, the heart that braces for loss before it arrives. Jung once suggested that what we refuse to see in ourselves never dies. It simply waits, becoming the shadow that follows us through every doorway. The courage to look does not come all at once. It begins in small movements, a hand brushing dust away, a breath drawn a little deeper. He writes a single word on a piece of paper, the name of the feeling he has avoided the longest. It trembles on the page, simple yet powerful, like a key left out in the open. By naming it, he has already lessened its power. The attic does not change after this. The air is still thick, the light still dim. But something in him feels different, lighter. It is as if the companion who lived there has finally stepped forward, not as an enemy, but as an old friend whose presence no longer threatens. The silence between them softens, and for the first time, he realizes that the forgotten parts of himself have only ever wanted reunion. He closes the box, not to hide it again, but to honor it. Some memories are not meant to be discarded. They are meant to be understood. What you hide holds your healing. The mantra hums quietly like breath beneath the dust, reminding him that no part of him has ever truly been lost, only waiting to be seen with gentleness instead of fear. Evening settles like a slow breath. The attic waits in its familiar silence, unchanged yet different. A single lamp stands on the floor now, its cord stretching like a thin line of intention. When he switches it on, the light does not rush in. It arrives carefully, spilling across the wooden boards in soft gradients, revealing what darkness had only hidden, never destroyed. Dust stirs, the air trembles slightly, and the room begins to remember itself. He has come back not to conquer this space, but to see it clearly. Shadows still linger in the corners, but they no longer feel like threats. They are simply parts of the room that have not yet been touched by light. The mind is no different. It carries its unlit corners, places where memory and fear sleep beside each other, waiting to be acknowledged. To look at them is not to defeat them, but to understand the shape of one's own being. For most of his life, he has believed that light meant safety and darkness meant danger. Now he begins to see that one defines the other. Without shadow, light has no texture. Without contrast, clarity is only blindness disguised as peace. True courage is not in keeping the darkness away, but in daring to walk into it with a lamp that might flicker but still burns. He steps closer to the center of the room, eyes adjusting to the dimness. What once felt endless now feels finite. A space he can breathe in. Each box, each corner holds stories, but none of them reach out to harm him. They simply wait for recognition. It occurs to him that fear is not a wall. It is a mirror that shows the distance between who he was and who he is willing to become. He sits down and unfolds a small piece of paper, the light catching the edges of his hand. The exercise is simple, yet it feels sacred. He begins to write a letter addressed not to the world, but to the weakest version of himself, the one who hesitated, who apologized for existing, who mistook endurance for strength. You did what you could, he writes slowly. You hid because you were scared, not because you were broken. I see you now, and I will not turn away. The ink pools in small pauses, as if the words themselves need time to breathe. When he finishes, the letter rests on his lap like a truce. The lamp hums softly, filling the space with a faint warmth that no sunlight could replicate. He does not tear the letter, nor fold it away. He leaves it open as a gesture of presence, an acknowledgement that healing is not forgetting, but staying long enough to understand. The courage to look is not a single act. It is a practice, a slow illumination that continues each time one chooses to remain with discomfort instead of escaping it. The more he allows the light to reach, the gentler the darkness becomes, as if grateful to be seen. The room feels less confined now, not because it has grown, but because his fear has shrunk to fit reality. As he turns off the lamp, the shadows return, soft and natural, no longer ominous. They fold into the room's quiet breathing. He understands now that light is not the opposite of darkness. It is its companion, its translator. To look is to begin to free. The mantra lingers in his mind as he descends the stairs, carrying the glow with him, not in his hands, but in his eyes. The rain has stopped, though the sound of it still lingers in memory. That rhythmic whisper against the window, the breath of clouds releasing what they could no longer hold. The air is softer now, carrying the scent of wet earth and the faint hum of renewal. Outside, puddles scatter across the street like mirrors left behind by the storm. In them, the world appears doubled, sky and ground folded into one reflection. The light has changed. It is no longer harsh, only patient. He steps outside and looks down. The puddles hold everything: drifting leaves, fragments of cloud, his own blurred silhouette. There is no judgment in the reflection, no attempt to sort what is beautiful from what is not. The water simply shows what is. For the first time, he notices how peaceful the world looks when it stops trying to appear clean. Perhaps the same is true of the mind. Peace comes not from purity, but from wholeness. For years, he believed acceptance meant perfection, that to be whole, one must erase the flaws, bury the failures, silence the shame. Yet each attempt to cut away the darker parts only deepened the wound. The storm taught him otherwise. It showed that even destruction can be honest. The sky never apologizes for thunder. It simply clears when its work is done. The mind, too, needs its tempests. They break what must be broken so light can reach what has been hidden too long. He remembers the version of himself that once lived in constant defense, always composed, always ready to deny the parts that felt too much or too little. Anger was forbidden, sadness disguised, desire muted. But the more he resisted, the louder those parts became, until resistance itself was the storm. It was only when he stopped running that the noise began to fade. Acceptance did not arrive as a burst of insight, but as a quiet exhaustion. The moment he realized there was nothing left to fix. Now, as he watches sunlight ripple across the puddles, he thinks about how the water holds both the sky and the dirt, and somehow remains whole. It does not choose, it allows, and that allowance is its peace. He wonders how many of his own so-called flaws were only feelings misunderstood. The sensitivity he once called weakness now lets him sense what others hide. The shame he carried for needing rest has become his understanding of balance. Every wound that once embarrassed him now speaks fluently of compassion. He kneels beside the reflection and smiles faintly. The surface trembles, but the image remains. Wholeness, he realizes, is not the absence of shadow. It is the recognition that the shadow belongs. Nothing within him needs exile. He can be the rain and in the clearing sky, the noise and the stillness, the fear and the courage that follows it. He takes a moment to whisper to himself, almost as if speaking to the sky. I forgive the storm for what it taught me too well. The words dissolve into the breeze, carried somewhere beyond the edges of the day. He stands, lighter now, as if gravity itself has eased. The world gleams with quiet gratitude, every reflection shimmering between imperfection and grace. He understands that peace does not mean the weather will never change. It means he is no longer afraid of its rhythm. The clouds will gather again, the sky will darken. But he is not the storm. He is the space that holds it. He is the sky, not the weather. Two candles stand side by side on the table, their flames leaning gently toward each other. The light they share flickers as one, and for a moment it is impossible to tell where one ends and the other begins. This is how love often looks. Two souls mirroring warmth, believing that what glows between them must come from the other's fire. Yet when one flame dims, the room feels colder, and suddenly the light that once felt shared reveals its illusion. It was never borrowed. It only reminded each of what was already there. He remembers when love felt like completion, the rush of recognition, the comfort of being understood, the sweetness of being chosen. It was as if the emptiness inside had finally found its echo. But over time, the echo grew distant. The things that once healed began to demand, and the affection that once soothed began to weigh. What he mistook for wholeness was dependency wearing a kind disguise. The heart had mistaken reflection for rescue. Jung wrote that what we love in others is often what we have lost in ourselves. The kindness that moves us, the strength we admire, the calm that steadies us, all are parts we have forgotten how to hold. Love becomes a mirror, and without realizing it, we start to chase what we once abandoned within. The danger is not in loving, but in expecting another to repair what we have refused to tend. No one can complete a person who does not remember they were never unfinished. He sits quietly, the candlelight trembling against his hands. The mind begins to recall how easily it builds altars to those who seem to fill its silence. In their presence, loneliness softens, but not because it disappears, because it feels momentarily unseen. He realizes that love, in its truest form, is not meant to erase solitude, but to make it gentler. To love is to share light, not to surrender one's own flame. There was a time when he thought giving everything meant loving deeply. He would bend to fit the shape of another's needs, dim his own brightness so the room could feel balanced. But love built on depletion does not last. It asks too much of the spirit and too little of the self. Slowly, he began to see that real connection does not drain, it sustains. It asks both to stand whole, side by side, and let a light meet in the middle without ownership. He picks up a small notebook and writes one sentence. I wanted someone to make me feel worthy. The words settle heavily on the page. It is not accusation, only truth. In that confession, something shifts. He understands that the worth he sought was never missing, only misplaced in the reflection of another's eyes. To recognize this is not loss, it is liberation. Outside, the night breathes softly. The candles burn lower, but their light remains steady. He studies their small dance. Two flames, neither competing nor consuming, simply coexisting. It is a quiet reminder that love, at its best, does not complete or correct. It expands. It meets what is whole and honors what is human. As he watches the wax pool beneath the wicks, he feels no sadness. The glow is gentle now, balanced. He knows that when the candles finally fade, the darkness will not mean absence, only rest. Because what they illuminated was never between them, but within him. The mantra settles in his chest like a steady breath, both truth and comfort. You don't need someone to fill you. You need someone who doesn't drain you. The canvas stood untouched for days. The brushes, once alive with motion, now lay silent, their tips hardened with forgotten color. He had stopped painting, not because he no longer cared, but because he no longer knew which strokes were his. Each time he lifted his hand, a quiet question echoed in his mind. Will they like it? The thought, so small, had become a chain. What once was creation had turned into performance. The painting was no longer a mirror of his soul, but a reflection of someone else's expectations. It happens quietly, this erosion of self. In love, in art, in life, we begin to melt into the people we cherish. At first, it feels beautiful to be understood, to be part of something larger, to dissolve into shared laughter and soft silences. But somewhere along the way, the edges blur. The we grows louder and the I begins to fade. The warmth that once nourished becomes a slow suffocation. Jung warned of this. The danger of fusion, where love turns into absorption and individuality drowns beneath affection's weight. The artist sits before the empty canvas again. He feels the tug of old habits, the urge to please, to conform, to create harmony at the expense of truth. Yet something inside resists. He remembers the first time he ever painted, before anyone cared, before there were eyes to impress or opinions to fear. Back then, the act itself was love, messy, honest, free. Now he longs for that silence again, the kind that lets the heart breathe without apology. He dips his brush into the paint, and this time, he does not think. The colors move like confession, wild and unmeasured. Each stroke becomes an act of remembrance. This is who I am. This is where I begin and end. Love, he realizes, must allow that same freedom. To love is not to dissolve, but to stand beside, to hold space without taking it. Mature love does not demand sameness. It celebrates difference. It honors the quiet truth that two complete souls can walk together without merging into one indistinct blur. Boundaries are not walls. They are contours. Without them, even the most beautiful connection collapses into confusion. He steps back from the painting. The image is raw, imperfect, undeniably his. It does not seek approval. It breathes with authenticity. There is an ache in that honesty, a recognition of what he lost in trying to belong. Yet within that ache lies peace. He understands now that love without space becomes a cage, gilded perhaps, but still confining. The cost of constant fusion is self-erasure, and no relationship built on that can endure without resentment. He closes his eyes and thinks of the relationships he has known, the ways he softened his voice, adjusted his colors, disguised discomfort for the sake of calm. It was never malice, only fear. The fear of being too much, of being left behind for simply being himself. But now he sees the quiet tragedy of that fear. What is kept small for love eventually withers, and what withers cannot love in return. The night deepens. His painting glows faintly under the lamplight, each color carrying the pulse of its own space. He writes in his notebook 3 boundaries worth keeping: time alone, honest speech, the right to say no. He reads them softly, as if reciting a vow not to another, but to his own becoming. The mantra rises in him, gentle yet resolute, a truth learned through loss and finally understood. Love without space becomes a cage. In a quiet garden at the edge of dawn, 2 trees stand side by side. Their branches rise separately, yet reach toward the same light. Beneath the soil, their roots spread in their own directions, never tangled, never competing, but drinking from the same deep ground. There is silence between them, not emptiness, but balance. The air that passes through their leaves does not divide them. It keeps them alive. This is how love breathes when it is understood. Connection is not a matter of closeness measured in inches or hours spent together. It is the invisible rhythm between 2 beings who can stand apart and still feel the pulse of belonging. Many forget this truth. They cling tighter, thinking affection grows through proximity, that love must always be held or spoken or proven. But the tighter the grasp, the more fragile it becomes. What truly endures is not possession, but presence. The quiet, knowing that even in silence, the bond remains. He once mistook closeness for merging. In past loves, he had blurred his edges, mistaking intimacy for access, thinking that to love meant to share everything, every thought, every fear, every hour. But too much sharing can drown what is sacred. In constant exposure, mystery dies, and with it, desire. True intimacy needs distance as much as it needs touch. Like breath, it expands and contracts, finding its life in the spaces between. He thinks of those trees again, the way the shadows cross only when the sun leans low. They do not demand that the other bend. They simply grow, steady, separate, and rooted in trust. The sacred distance is not a wall. It is a meadow. It gives love room to walk, to wander, to return. It allows each soul to remain sovereign, so the meeting can remain a choice, not a dependency. He remembers a time he felt most free, walking home at dusk, knowing someone waited, but not needing to call. The bond existed quietly, like the hum beneath music, felt rather than displayed. Freedom and love did not oppose each other. They completed the same circle. It was the moment he realized that genuine connection asks not for constant closeness, but for mutual breathing space. The kind that keeps both alive and unafraid. He sits down and writes a small reflection. I felt free when I knew I could be myself without disappearing from someone's heart. The words feel tender, like a truth rediscovered rather than learned. He sees now that sacred distance is an act of faith, trusting that love can hold steady without control. Two souls can walk beside each other without touching every moment, and still remain deeply entwined in essence. The garden outside grows brighter. The morning wind sways the trees in opposite directions, yet both lean again toward the same light. Their dance is slow, invisible to those who rush, but it speaks of something ancient, a language of balance, respect, and quiet devotion. He breathes in deeply, the air cool and alive, and whispers a thought that feels like both prayer and understanding. Love is not a chain, it is a rhythm. True closeness does not cling, it breathes. The night stretches wide, a quiet expanse without walls or directions. In that endless openness, a single figure walks, slow, deliberate, carrying a small lantern. Its light barely reaches a few steps ahead, yet it is enough. Around him, the desert hums in silence, vast and ancient, indifferent to the paths humans try to draw. Each grain of sand reflects a fragment of the stars, and under their cold patience, he feels both tiny and infinite. Freedom, he realizes, begins not in movement, but in the willingness to walk without needing a destination. There is a moment in every life when belonging starts to feel too tight, when the places, faces, and routines that once defined safety begin to close in like gentle cages. It is not rejection that stirs the need to leave. It is something deeper, an instinct that whispers, "You have learned what you needed here." Jung once suggested that individuation, the becoming of the self, begins where adaptation ends. To find one's own voice, one must first endure the echo of solitude. The desert is not cruel, it is honest. It strips away what is borrowed. Without the noise of belonging, there is only you, your thoughts, your breath, your heartbeat under the wide sky. Many fear this silence because it doesn't flatter. It doesn't promise comfort. It asks you to face the emptiness and see whether you can still stand. But beneath that challenge lies its gift. When everything external falls away, what remains is the real you, unadorned, unapproved, unafraid. He stops walking and looks around. The horizon dissolves into shadow, and the wind carries no answer. The lantern flickers, and for a second, the darkness presses closer. Yet even in that stillness, he feels a strange companionship. The desert doesn't speak, but it listens. It allows him to exist without expectation. There is no applause, no validation, no role to play, only presence. He remembers the nights he once spent surrounded by people, laughter echoing like a mask against loneliness. How easily noise was mistaken for connection. But here, in the vast absence of everything, the silence feels fuller, as if containing 1,000 unseen lives. It is here he understands that solitude is not exile, it is invitation. The desert calls not to isolate, but to awaken. He sits on a cool sand and takes a deep breath. For the first time in months, he turns off every device. No messages, no screens, no reminders of who he is supposed to be. The only sound is the wind moving softly over the dunes. In that stillness, the mind stops demanding, the body stops performing, and the soul begins to hum its own forgotten song. There is no belonging here, and yet everything belongs. The stars remain distant, but their light is enough to guide him home, not to a place, but to a state of being. The desert, once feared for its emptiness, becomes a cathedral of silence, where he kneels not in prayer, but in recognition. He lifts the lantern again, the flame small yet unwavering. It casts no promise, only truth. Freedom does not arrive with company. It begins when belonging ends. At the edge of the city, where the lights fade into open fields, a man stands before a fork in the road. Behind him lies the comfort of familiarity, voices, promises, and patterns that hum like a song he no longer believes in. Ahead stretches a narrow path, dim and uncertain, swallowed by quiet. There is no one to tell him where it leads, only the sound of wind in the grass, like breath against the ear of the earth. He feels the weight of the moment, not in his feet, but in his chest, the still ache that comes when safety and truth no longer live in the same direction. He knows what the road behind offers: the illusion of belonging, the warmth of routine, the praise that comes when one stays within the lines. Yet that warmth has grown heavy. It carries a quiet cost, the slow erosion of self under the weight of approval. Jung once said that comfort, when clung to too tightly, becomes a kind of prison. Peace, the kind that frees rather than pleases, cannot be built upon fear. He takes a step forward, and the silence deepens. It is not welcoming, not hostile, just vast. The night around him feels alive in its stillness, and for a moment he understands why so few choose this road. Freedom does not come with guarantees. To walk toward peace is to walk away from certainty. There will be no audience to applaud your courage, no voice to confirm you chose right. The path offers nothing but truth, and truth, when stripped of illusion, can feel like loss. He stops and glances back. The city still glows faintly, golden and inviting. He can almost hear laughter carried on the wind, promises of comfort whispering, "Come back. It's easier here." And for a brief moment, he wants to. But then he remembers. Peace is not ease. It is honesty. And every time he has chosen the easier path, something within him has dimmed a little more. There is a quiet trade between the soul and the world. To be free, one must give up control. To rest in peace, one must release the desire to be constantly reassured. He kneels and writes a single line in the dirt with his finger. What am I holding too tightly because I fear to lose it? The words look small against the vast ground, but their meaning echoes. He realizes the things most fiercely protected often protect us least. The approval of others, the illusion of security, the certainty of plans. None of these are peace. They are the walls that keep us from finding it. The night grows colder, but not cruel. He feels lighter now, not because the burden is gone, but because he has stopped arguing with it. Some truths are not to be solved, only to be lived. Peace, he understands, is not found when everything feels stable. It arrives when you stop clinging to stability itself. As he finally turns toward the silent road, his steps make no sound. The air holds him gently, as if acknowledging his choice. The city behind him will keep shining, unaware that one of its own has chosen to disappear into stillness. That is the nature of peace. It makes no announcement. It only waits for the brave. He takes another step into the dark, the faint hum of quiet growing louder inside his chest. He has paid the price, and in the paying has begun to breathe. The mantra follows him softly into the night, like a promise whispered by the wind. Peace has a price, but so does pretending. The morning arrives without sound. The wind has stopped moving, and the lake lies untouched, a sheet of glass spread wide beneath the slow awakening sky. There are no ripples, no birds crossing, only stillness that feels both fragile and eternal. The surface mirrors everything above it: clouds, branches, faint light, all suspended in perfect calm. It is a quiet so complete that even thought seems to hesitate before entering. This is not the silence of absence, but of fullness, the kind that holds the entire world in a single breath. He sits beside the water, knees drawn to his chest, and watches as the reflection sharpens with each passing minute. Somewhere between sky and lake, he begins to recognize himself, not as a body, but as a presence within presence. For so long he had feared silence, believing it to be emptiness, the echo of being alone. Yet now, surrounded by it, he realizes silence was never against him. It had always been waiting, patient and steady, like an old friend standing just outside the noise. Jung once suggested that the soul speaks only in quiet symbols, that we hear its voice not when the world is loud, but when we stop resisting its stillness. He thinks back to the years he filled with sound, endless conversations, screens glowing through the night, distractions dressed as purpose. All of it an attempt to escape the simple fact that peace cannot be found outside. It does not need to be discovered because it was never gone. Peace is memory, the memory of what we are when the mind grows soft enough to remember. He closes his eyes. The lake fades from sight, but its stillness remains, unfolding inward. Beneath his fingertips, his pulse begins to steady. There is no lesson here, no demand to understand, only rhythm. The heart beats quietly, not as an instruction, but as a reminder. You are still here. The body, which once carried so much tension, begins to loosen its grip. Breath becomes the bridge between silence and awareness, flowing in, flowing out without effort. For 3 minutes, he lets everything go. No plans, no names, no definitions. The world continues beyond him, but he no longer needs to chase it. In this moment, he does not seek clarity or revelation. He simply listens. And in that listening, something profound yet unspoken arises. A sense of being held by something larger, something that does not speak but understands. It is not comfort in the ordinary sense. It is recognition. When he opens his eyes again, the light has shifted. The lake mirrors him perfectly now, and for a brief instant, he feels like part of it, not separate, not reflected, but continuous. The fear of stillness dissolves into gratitude. The silence, once a stranger, now feels like home. It asks for nothing, demands nothing. It only reminds him that beneath all storms, the surface always finds its calm again. He stands slowly, taking one last look at the mirror of water. The clouds drift above, and their shapes change with grace, yet the lake accepts each one without resistance. That is peace, not control, not escape, but acceptance. As he walks away, the sound of his heartbeat follows him, soft and rhythmic, like footsteps fading into eternity. The mantra hums gently in his mind, both truth and return. Peace is not found, it is remembered. The room is dark, except for a single flame trembling on a table. It flickers wildly, stretching and shrinking, never still, never certain. The shadows it casts move with it, painting shifting shapes across the walls, a dance of light that never repeats itself. There is beauty in its instability, in its refusal to obey. This is where creation begins, not in calm predictability, but in the wild pulse between order and disorder, where form meets possibility and refuses to settle. He sits before the flame and watches its restlessness. For years, he had been taught to chase stability, to keep things neat, safe, defined. Yet the longer he lived inside that order, the smaller his world became. Everything predictable lost its spark. The same thoughts returned like clockwork, the same routines repeated until life felt polished but hollow. Jung once said that chaos is the raw material of transformation, that the soul, much like fire, cannot breathe inside perfection. The man now begins to understand. What burns creates light, but what is contained too tightly eventually dies. He remembers a time when his mind was filled with wild ideas, things that made no sense, dreams that frightened him with their scale. Back then, he called them impossible. Now, he realizes they were alive, waiting to be born in a world less afraid of disorder. Creativity, he sees, is not about mastery. It is about surrender. It is trusting that in chaos there is rhythm, and in uncertainty, direction. To create is to let the universe spill through you before you have time to categorize it. The flame leans suddenly, as if caught by a breeze that doesn't exist. Its light reaches the farthest corner of the room, the one he has always left in shadow. For a moment, it reveals everything. The scattered sketches, the abandoned notes, the unfinished beginnings of what could have been. He feels something stir within him, not guilt, but recognition. The chaos he has avoided is not destruction. It is potential, disguised as mess. He takes a deep breath and picks up a pen. On the blank page before him, he writes a single idea, one he has always deemed too strange, too risky, too unrealistic. The words come slowly, awkward at first, but then they start to move with their own rhythm. The page fills, the mind opens, and suddenly the silence of the room feels alive again. It is not control that brings creation, but permission. The flame bends again, as if nodding in approval. Outside, the night deepens, but the room grows brighter. He realizes that chaos is not the enemy of peace. It is its origin. Without contrast, calm has no meaning. Without risk, beauty has no pulse. True order is not achieved by suppressing chaos, but by learning to dance with it. The creative act, in every form, is rebellion against stillness, a spark refusing to die quietly. He sets the pen down and watches the flame one last time. Its glow softens, steady now, as if the act of creation has given it purpose. He knows that tomorrow the world will still demand predictability, still praise stability. But tonight he has remembered a truth: that stability builds walls, while chaos builds wings. And with that knowing, the darkness around him no longer feels empty. It feels alive, ready to move. The workshop is nearly silent except for the soft crackle of burning coals. Shadows climb the walls like living brushstrokes, shaped by the rhythm of the flame. A man stands before the forge, his hands steady, his face marked by soot and patience. The air smells of metal and heat, a scent both harsh and holy. Every strike of the hammer rings through the room, echoing not as noise, but as pulse. This is his solitude, not an escape from the world, but a meeting with it on deeper terms. He works alone, yet not lonely. There is company in the repetition, in the way the metal softens under heat, then hardens again through impact. The process demands presence. Too much force and it breaks. Too little and it bends without purpose. Between these two edges lies mastery, and mastery, he knows, is not the absence of error, but the willingness to face it again and again. Each spark that leaps from the anvil feels like a thought made visible, brief, bright, and gone too soon, but always leaving a trace. Outside, the world craves results, noise, and validation. Inside this room, only rhythm matters. Jung once said that what we do alone defines what we are in truth, because solitude strips away all performance. Here, there are no eyes to please, no applause waiting at the end of effort. Only the sound of labor and the quiet discipline of persistence. In that silence, something begins to form. Not just the object in his hands, but the mind itself, forged by repetition and patience into something resilient, steady, and true. He pauses, wiping his brow, watching the metal glow red before fading to dark. The glow reminds him of his own inner work, the kind that happens unseen. Solitude, he realizes, is a kind of forge. It tests, it refines, it hardens where needed, and softens where it must. Every hour spent in silence is a hammerstroke against the ego, shaping it into humility, strength, and clarity. It is not the noise of applause that strengthens him, but the quiet weight of attention. He sets the hammer down and listens. The fire hums low, a constant companion. The flicker reflects in his eyes, small yet unyielding. He thinks of how easily the world dismisses solitude as emptiness, when in truth, it is the birthplace of creation. What is forged in isolation is not cold detachment, but heat refined into vision. The artist, the thinker, the builder, all must pass through this quiet trial where doubt burns away and conviction takes form. He takes a deep breath and feels the warmth against his chest. Tomorrow, the world will ask for results, for proof of progress, for something to show. But tonight, he will give himself something rarer, permission to create without expectation. No deadlines, no audience, just the act itself. To make something for no one but himself is to reclaim what the noise has stolen, the joy of becoming rather than performing. The coals shift, glowing softly as if nodding in approval. He knows the work is far from done, but for now, that is enough. The silence no longer feels empty. It feels earned. It holds within it the hum of creation, the quiet rhythm of becoming. The world outside may still chase applause, but he has learned something far greater, that creation needs silence more than applause. The earth is quiet after the fire. Ash drifts like faint snow across the darkened ground, and the air still carries the memory of smoke. Where trees once stood, only charred branches remain, fragile as whispers. Yet beneath the ruin, the soil is breathing. The fire that seemed to devour everything has left behind something unseen. A warmth beneath the surface, fertile and waiting. It is strange how destruction in time becomes nourishment. What burns may die in form, but not in essence. He walks slowly through the field, the sound of his steps soft against the soot. There is an unfamiliar calm in witnessing what once lived now rest. At first, it feels like loss, the silence after intensity, the emptiness that follows collapse. But the longer he stays, the more he senses something subtle stirring below. Nature does not mourn in despair. It renews through surrender. Jung once wrote that new life demands the death of old identities, that the soul grows by shedding the masks it once mistook for skin. The fire, then, is not punishment, it is purification. In the still air, he kneels and touches the soil. Beneath the thin layer of ash, it is warm, alive. A single green sprout pushes through, fragile, trembling, yet insistent. It does not know what came before, nor does it apologize for growing in the ruins. It simply reaches toward the light. That small stem becomes a lesson. Endings are not voids, they are doorways. The destruction that terrifies us is often the space our lives needed to breathe again. He remembers the versions of himself that burned away, the ones built on control, on pleasing, on pretending. Each fell apart in its own time, leaving behind a trail of emptiness he once called failure. But now he sees that collapse differently. When something in us dies, it is often the untrue part, the one that could not carry our becoming. The person who breaks is not weak, he is opening. The ashes are not evidence of death, they are the soil of renewal. He sits there and writes a small reflection in his notebook. I am ready to let the old story die, so something truer can live. The words feel solemn, but not sad, like closing a door gently after a long night. There is relief in naming what must end. The past does not vanish when released. It simply changes its shape, becoming the foundation of what comes next. Just as soil remembers every fire yet still allows the seed to grow, the soul remembers its suffering but no longer lets it rule. A breeze stirs. Ash rises and scatters across the field, light as dust, and the sun, faint but steady, begins to break through the clouds. The landscape shifts from mourning to renewal in a single breath. He watches the light fall on the tiny sprout again, sees it glisten, fragile yet defiant. What once looked like an ending now looks like a beginning too quiet to be noticed before. He closes his notebook and whispers to the wind, not as a prayer, but as recognition. Every ending is a seed disguised as loss. Every silence is a womb preparing to give birth. The cycle is not cruel, it is continuous. Beneath the ashes, life waits patiently, certain of its return. And when he stands to leave, the world feels softer, lighter, whole again. Because from endings, life breathes again. At the edge of the continent, where the river finally meets the sea, there is a sound like breathing. The current that once hurried through mountains, stones, and cities slows as it nears the horizon. The water hesitates for a moment, then merges quietly into something vast. There is no conflict, no resistance, only joining. What was once a river does not vanish. It becomes part of something greater. The taste changes, the color deepens, but its essence remains the same. This is how harmony happens, not through victory of one side over another, but through surrender. He stands on the shore and watches the mingling currents, thinking about the wars within himself. For years, his mind and heart had lived as rivals, reason demanding proof, emotion demanding release. Each spoke in a different language, neither willing to listen. When he followed the mind, life felt sterile. When he followed the heart, it often burned out too fast. It took him years to see that peace was never about choosing one. It was about learning to let both speak and realizing they were never enemies, only halves of the same voice. Jung called this process individuation, the becoming whole by uniting what was once divided. Logic and feeling, strength and vulnerability, control and surrender. Each is a current flowing toward the same ocean of awareness. He recalls how often he tried to silence one to protect the other, believing balance meant suppression. But suppression is not harmony. It is fear in disguise. True balance arrives when each part is seen, understood, and allowed to exist without the need to dominate. He looks at the river again. The line where fresh water meets salt is visible only for an instant before it dissolves. There is no boundary, only blending. Perhaps this is what it means to be whole, to flow into one's contradictions without judgment. The mind's structure offers clarity. The heart's chaos gives depth. Together, they form something both grounded and alive. The human spirit, like water, is meant to move, to change form while remaining true. He takes out his notebook and writes slowly, "My fear and my hope have stopped fighting. They now walk beside each other." The sentence feels simple, but it holds years of struggle. He remembers how hard it was to admit that courage is born not from denying fear, but from walking with it. That love is not the opposite of pain, but its quiet companion, and that reason is not the enemy of feeling. It is the structure that lets emotions speak clearly. The tide begins to rise. Waves creep closer to his feet, pulling the sand away, grain by grain. The sensation is grounding, like being reminded that everything we stand on eventually moves. He realizes harmony is not a permanent state. It is a practice, a daily willingness to meet oneself halfway, to sit at the edge of inner conflict and let both voices speak until they find a rhythm that feels like breathing. The horizon glows faintly as the sun begins to fall. River and sea shimmer together, indistinguishable now, infinite and still moving. The world seems to exhale. He whispers a line to the wind, not as a conclusion, but as understanding. Wholeness is friendship between opposites. And in that friendship, the river finally finds peace in becoming the sea. Morning light slips through the half-drawn curtains, soft and golden, touching the dust that floats lazily in the air. The room is the same as it always was. The same wooden desk, the same quiet hum of the old clock, yet everything feels different. The silence has changed its shape. It no longer echoes with restlessness. It rests, settled, like a long-held breath, finally released. He has returned, though not as the person who once left. The journey has carved its lines into his being, invisible yet unmistakable. He stands at the window, watching how the light spreads across the floor, warm and patient. Once, this room felt too small, a cage for unspoken dreams. He used to look outside and wonder what waited beyond, what pieces of himself were scattered across the horizon. So he left, chasing answers, chasing versions of himself that the world might understand. He believed that becoming meant distance. But distance, he has learned, was only half the story. Every path, no matter how far it wandered, was quietly leading him back here, to the simple presence he once overlooked. Jung wrote that life's second half is not about expansion, but return, the homecoming of the soul to its own center. He thinks of that now, standing in the golden stillness, realizing that the room has never changed. Only his way of seeing it has. The shadows are softer, the air more forgiving. The walls that once confined him now feel like arms. It was never the world that needed to grow. It was his awareness. And in that shift, everything finds its rightful size again. He pulls out the chair by the window and sits. The wood creaks familiarly beneath him, a sound that feels like welcome. He closes his eyes, breathing deeply, not to fix, not to analyze, just to be. The inhale arrives easily, the exhale leaves without effort. He notices how his chest rises and falls, how the air enters and leaves without judgment. This, he thinks, is what it means to come home, to inhabit the moment fully, to stop searching for the next version of peace. For 3 minutes, he lets himself disappear into the rhythm of breathing, into the quiet hum of being alive. When he opens his eyes, the world is still ordinary, yet somehow radiant. The desk is still scattered with old notes, the curtain still sways faintly in the breeze. But within that ordinariness, he senses grace, a small, luminous acceptance that everything is enough as it is. The need to prove, to chase, to define has dissolved into stillness. He realizes that home was never the place he left, but the awareness he carried with him all along. He glances again at the morning light. It no longer feels like a visitor. It feels like part of him, the same glow that once burned quietly during every night of solitude, every moment of doubt. The room, the air, the silence, all are mirrors reflecting the truth he had to travel so far to see. That peace was never out there waiting. It was always here, waiting for him to arrive. As he sits in that knowing, a small smile touches his face, not of triumph, but of recognition. The journey is not over, but the search has softened. He is finally where he began. Only now he understands. The mantra hums gently through his breath, a reminder as calm as dawn itself. Home was never a place, it was presence. The tide retreats in slow rhythm, leaving soft traces of foam on the sand. The sky stretches wide and pale, and the wind moves gently along the shore, whispering through the salt and silence. A lone figure walks where the water meets the land. No footprints before him, no audience behind. Each step sinks slightly, fills with water, then vanishes again. There is no destination, no urgency, no one to witness his passage. And for the first time in a long while, that feels like grace. He used to believe freedom meant noise, movement, adventure, the thrill of being seen doing something extraordinary. But the older he grew, the more he realized that much of what he called freedom was still performance. It was the ego's last disguise, still seeking applause from unseen eyes. True freedom, he understands now, is quieter. It is not the rush of escape, but the calm of arrival. the moment when you no longer need to prove that you exist. Jung once wrote that liberation begins not with rebellion, but with reconciliation. The man walking now has made peace with solitude, and in doing so, has found a kind of lightness that cannot be earned from the world. The beach around him hums with quiet life. Seabirds circle high above, waves breathe against the sand, and the horizon bends into infinity. He feels small, but not diminished. To be small in such vastness is to belong to something immeasurable. The world does not need his explanations, nor does he need its approval. He simply walks, carried by rhythm rather than reason, each step a silent affirmation that existence itself is enough. There was a time when silence frightened him, when a quiet evening felt like rejection, when solitude carried the taste of failure. Back then, every pause was filled with noise, every stillness quickly replaced by activity. But solitude, when faced with patience, changes its nature. The silence he once feared has softened into presence. It no longer reminds him of absence. It reminds him of depth. He sees now that peace is not the end of sound, but the understanding of what sound hides. He stops walking for a moment and looks out toward the horizon. The sea glimmers faintly beneath the light, endless yet intimate. He thinks of how much of life is spent chasing validation, in gestures, in words, in being seen. And then he realizes that the most honest joys are often the ones no one notices. The warmth of morning light, the scent of rain, the rhythm of breathing. These things ask for nothing, give everything, and vanish quietly without name or praise. He kneels and traces a line in the sand, a small reflection of his thought. "I am at peace," he writes, "and I don't need anyone to confirm it." The wind moves gently across the words, softening them until they fade. Strangely, that erasure feels right. Some truths do not need to be preserved. They only need to be lived. The sea keeps its calm rhythm as the sun begins to lower. The man stands again, feeling the sand cool beneath his feet. Freedom, he realizes, is not loud. It doesn't announce itself or demand to be understood. It is simply the moment you no longer need the world to echo back who you are. The waves reach for his ankles one last time, a quiet acknowledgement before receding. The world has not changed, but his place within it has. The silence he once feared has become his companion, steady, patient, and wise. It asks for nothing, and in that nothing gives everything. The mantra drifts through him like the tide returning to the sea. The silence you feared has become your teacher. The morning unfolds slowly. Soft light filters through the curtains, touching the edges of the room with a gentle warmth. You lie there, eyes half open, listening to the rhythm of your own breath. Steady, quiet, human. The world outside has begun to stir again, but in this brief space between night and day, everything feels suspended, whole. You have walked far to reach the stillness. Through noise and shadow, through loss and longing, you have circled the same question until it softened in your hands. Now, there's no more searching to do, no mask to hold, no version of yourself left to perform. What remains is simple presence, the kind that doesn't demand, doesn't chase, doesn't need to prove its worth to anyone. There are no applause, no grand endings waiting here, only a quiet understanding, pulsing softly beneath the skin. That peace was never something to find, only something to remember. The silence that once frightened you has turned into a friend. The solitude you once resisted has become your ground. Every journey of return begins here, in the unguarded breath, in the calm recognition that nothing outside you was ever missing. You take another slow inhale, feeling the air move through you like light through water. The body rests, the mind loosens, and the heart, that tireless traveler, finally comes home. Outside, the day grows brighter, but a real illumination happens within. You are no longer running from yourself. You are standing still with yourself. And that is enough. The sun rises higher, spilling gold across the floor. You close your eyes again, not to escape, but to stay. Because now you understand. Peace was never meant to be chased. It was meant to be lived. And as the light rests gently over you, it feels less like an ending and more like a quiet beginning. Everything you seek outside has always lived within.